On today's World Inside, the Shawshank Redemption, the stage play adaptation, rolls up the curtains for audiences in Beijing. We get a backstage pass for the inside scoop on the play actors. Well-loved comedian Henry Rowswell, also known as the Shawn to Chinese audiences, with 3 other play actors, Shawn Patrick Moore, Clarke and Matti Lehtonen.
Hello and welcome to World Inside with me, Tian Wei. Perhaps one of the most inspiring films in history, The Shawshank Redemption, has made a big impression on global moviegoers. Many have retold the story in various forms ever since. Recently, its new Chinese stage adaptation has been presented in Beijing. The very unique thing about this 150-minute stage play is performed in the Chinese language by foreign actors from 8 different countries. Among them, Henry Rowswell, a well-known Canadian comedian among Chinese audiences, plays as Red, the narrator of the movie. I reunited with him at the theater Backstage, where he talked about his role and also himself being a bridge of cultures. Amazing.
The Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. So how would you describe your role there?
So I play the role of Red, which in the movie everyone knows was an iconic performance by Morgan Freeman. I should say in the book, the play is based on the novel. So it's not directly based on the movie, it's based on the original novel. And in the novel, the character Red actually was Irish. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an African-American character, although Morgan Freeman was such an amazing performance. But the part that role plays is as a character, but also as the narrator for the story. So I think the main reason I was hired for this production is because I've done a lot of stage work, either drama or just hosting shows or Chinese comedy or stand-up comedy. I have a lot of experience on stage, and they just wanted the voice as the narrator of the story.
Which specific lines or scenes of the story in which your role was playing a significant part of the play that it seems transcend to the audience?
For me specifically, in my role, in the second act, there's a scene, you know, every year I go through this application for parole, and every year I'm turned down. And that's one of the progressions of the character Red, is that he eventually gives up. He doesn't care anymore. And so in the second act, there's a scene where I start saying the same thing to the parole board over and over, and as I speak, I just turn around and I open the cell, and I actually get into the cell, and I close the door and I lock it myself. Like, I just know there's no way.
Right.
And then there's all the other characters disappear, and as I said, it becomes dark and there's sort of a spotlight. And I talk to the audience about how this is what prison does to you. At first, you hate these walls, then you get used to them. Then you end up relying on them. You need them. You need to be locked up because you're not used to that freedom anymore. That's what prison does to you, is that those walls become internalized. And for me, that's really a core element of the story. And it's one scene where I'm able to, you know, close the door to the cell and talk to the audience from behind the cell. I think that's, for me, that's a really dramatic scene.
Right. It's such a well-known story, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do you, give it a Marx way of the interpretation?
We're working with a really great director on this, Zhang Guoli, with lots of experience. And it was his idea to use an all-foreign cast. And I think that is a first in China, to use an all-foreign cast to perform in Chinese.
Right.
And a lot of people ask me, it's such an American story. Do you think Chinese audiences will understand it, or, And I thought, well, it's a story that happens in a prison. It doesn't mean you have to be a prisoner to understand the story. 99.9% of the audience have never been in prison, but it makes sense, right?
We all have our own prisons.
It's a story about hope.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's we all live in some kind of prison, and it's a story about trying to break out of that, and to pursue
and camaraderie
your own dream.
and
yeah, and friendship, yeah. And how, you know, all those restrictions, and you become used to the restrictions. And really, the special thing about my friend Andy in the prison is that he's someone who never gives up. My character has given up. This is it for the rest of my life. I'm just going to stay here. And Andy's inspiration is that he never gives up. And when he finally breaks out of prison, that's the catalyst for me to suddenly say, wow, you know, maybe there is life beyond these walls.
Did you give up? I mean, after all, you took on this role only after 3 years of the pandemic.
In the early stages of the pandemic, I just thought, okay, this is going to be 6 months or a year. I need to focus on doing something productive. So I set up a studio at home and I started to do narration and just as a personal form of practice, and then do some Chinese poetry or do some storytelling, recording, you know, just trying to practice as a voice actor. Well, and then the videos took off. So I didn't know that, you know, social media, people would enjoy watching poetry so much.
Yeah, especially your poetry recital of ancient Chinese poems.
Yeah. For me, the classical poetry was something I did just as a personal study. But I gradually sort of, and through the videos on social media, gradually found out a way for me to do it that resonated with the audience. And I think the main thing is to bring out the emotion of the poem. So rather than do it in the traditional, very standard, proper way, to really, I try to speak classical Chinese as if it was just spoken language, right. Which of course it's not, right? It's a written classical language. But to speak it, the emotion, as if it was simply our everyday modern language, and to bring out the emotion of the poem. And I think that's something maybe, you know, as a Westerner, as a non-Chinese person, and also bringing in non-Chinese elements like the music. Of course, Chinese poetry traditionally has been closely linked with music. A lot of the poems actually are lyrics. They're lyrics to songs that have been lost. And so there, you know, there's a rhythm. It's very musical. Kind of form of literature. So bringing music in, even if it's not Chinese music, really helps take it to a different level. And I think maybe that's just a little bit of the freshness to it. You know, for instance, we do a famous poem by Li Bai called Shu Dao Nan. The mountain roads of Shu are very treacherous. And it's all about just the wonder of nature, these massive mountains, and it's so impossible to cross. And you know, the grandeur of this natural landscape. And we used sort of modern free jazz to sort of express that idea. And it seems weird, like why would you do modern jazz with traditional Chinese tongue poetry? But in terms of a theme, it's a different way. It's maybe not the correct way, it's maybe not the best way, but it's a unique way to do it. And I think that resonates with people.
Many of the poems you try to portray actually are poetry with strong emotions.
Yeah, I tend to pick poems that have more of a story to them. So especially the long form poems like Ode to the Red Cliffs or Changhenge, the ballad of, what is we call that? The ballad of eternal remorse or something.
Well, you know better than I do.
The ballad of everlasting regret. I think that's what we call it, yeah. And it's a tragic love story. And Pipa Xing, the Ballad of the Pipa, they're long form stories.
Yeah, so and those are very emotional stories.
Yeah, so they have characters and they have a flow to them. They're not just a simple landscape painting or something. They have more stories and more drama. Yeah. And that's what I enjoy doing.
Did you discover something about those poems that you didn't earlier?
You know, when we're studying Chinese culture, often the sort of approach is just to say how splendid and unique Chinese culture is, which of course it is. But also when you dig deeper, especially into something like poetry, a poem that was written 1,000 years ago, the reason it still resonates with us today is because there's a core of human experience or human emotion to it. And if you can get beyond the language barrier or beyond the expression of that idea, the idea or the feeling or the concept is quite universal. So for instance, I mentioned the roads of Shu. It's just about the awe of nature, the awesomeness of nature. Everybody feels that. Or a tragic love story. Everybody can feel the emotion of a tragic love story. So if you focus on the specific, you know, this is an emperor and a concubine and they're both Chinese, this is a uniquely Chinese thing, but the emotion behind it is just human emotion. And I think that's the way you bridge cultures, is by showing commonality rather than difference.
How do you read people looking at you as a cultural symbol? They try to find out what Dashan is doing, what does that mean? If Dashan is doing it, you know?
It took me a while to figure out why people liked my performances, because obviously the first level is just, okay, here's a non-Chinese person speaking Chinese, and he's speaking Chinese fluently, so it's kind of a novelty. But you know, after 35 years now, it's not really a novelty anymore. And it has been something of you have to realize that there's sort of what you do specifically, but there's also this image out there that you don't necessarily control. That's the icon part, right? It's some public image based on what you do, but you don't really control that image. So that's why I often talk of Dashan in the third person.
Yeah.
But my understanding of what that image is, if it's a cultural symbol, a cultural icon, it's a symbol of Chinese and Western culture coming together in a way that somehow it works. It's not about culture clash. Like, people see my comedy and they say, you know, it's not really xiangsheng, but it's not really stand-up either. It's sort of halfway between Western stand-up and Chinese crosstalk. It's somewhere in the middle, but it's not a clash. It makes sense. And the poetry, you know, we do a poem with an orchestra or something. It's East meets West, but somehow it works. So I'm quite happy to be a symbol of that. Not be a symbol of misunderstanding and culture clash and culture shock, but an understanding that when cultures come together, there is a blending and there is a complement. You know, the two cultures, the East and West in general, are very complementary, I find.
Think about it. It's already 40 years. Almost, right?
That's right.
What have the experiences while you are reaching different ages taught you?
I think, well, as a performer, I'd say I try to learn from my experience and try to continue doing what I'm doing, but not repeat. So for instance, you know, I don't do tongue twisters anymore. I don't do the same kind of shows I was doing in the 1990s or the 2000s or even the 2010s. I'm doing the shows that I want to do now, and I think all of that experience is a treasure, but I'm trying to use that to do something a little bit different, and always trying to challenge myself to take it to a next level. I never quite know what the next level is, but at least for myself, always trying to raise the bar. And so now I think at this stage in my life, working more as a narrator and a voice actor is something that really challenges me. So for instance, playing Red in the Shawshank Redemption, or doing poetry with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, or we're doing an event next week to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Lao She, one of the great authors, Beijing style authors, and we're doing narration. And you know, performing with another group of wonderful professionals, always trying to do something a little bit different. And honestly, trying to break down the barriers so that when we're doing shows, it doesn't always have to be the foreign group and the Chinese group. We can mix it up and we can bring it together. That's what I try to do.
If we look at the things from a very, very far and distant angle, those are only toys.
And maybe there's a little bit of Buddhism and Taoism there too.
A little bit.
Don't take it too seriously. Don't take it too seriously. Just enjoy the moment and try to do your best.
Always good to see you.
It's great to be on the show again.
This is World Inside. Still to come, the inside scoop on the Shawshank Redemption, the stage play continues. Welcome back. This is World Inside. I'm Tian Wei. The 150-minute stage play this time is performed in the Chinese language by foreign actors from 8 different countries. Though not professional ones, they surely displayed their love of the story in every word and every move. I talked to some of them to learn about their roles and their understanding of the Chinese culture. So good to see you. Congratulations for this Great play.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell us about the role that you play and why you think it might echo with our audience. Matti.
Well, I play the librarian, Brooks Hatlen. I'm not one of the main characters, but I'm a very central character for the whole play. I'm
sure
the
it
symbol of institutionalization. You know, someone who has been in this prison for 42 years and is about to be released. And while in the prison, I have a certain position. You know, people respect me. I mean, they make fun of me, but they respect me. Outside, I have nothing. And I'm fearful of the outside. And what happens once I get released is very tragic. So it's a very, very touching part, but also very difficult to play. It's very, very emotional, as you will see on Sunday.
James?
Can I just say that's the first time I've heard him speak so much English before? Because usually we have to speak Chinese together.
Right.
And your English is great.
Well, thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Yes. We have a rule that if you speak
That's
English,
what
you get
we're
fined.
looking for, right?
We get fined
To practice
20.
English with.
He was never fined, though.
He never gets fined. That's right, exactly. So Wei, I play a role, the role of Andy Dufresne in the Shawshank Redemption theatre version, which is, as many of your viewers probably know, is the banker that has been wrongfully imprisoned in Shawshank. This is a good friend of mine in the play, and this guy, we don't get
Less
along.
so.
I could almost tell when you guys walked in. Shawn, what about you?
So I am one of the villains of the play, a small one.
Yeah.
One of the antagonists. Pretty small
Try to
role.
make a big air of it.
Yeah, my whole job is to be as mean as possible to him, because I guess I find meaning in my life this way. To
Good
be
for
honest,
you.
yeah, there aren't many redeeming qualities about my character. I think, if any, it's at the very end. We're just so impressed by how Andy is, he doesn't give up, right? And it finally succeeds. And that for us, there's a scene where we're kind of, just wondering at this, how this was possible, and I think that touches us in some way.
Shawshank Redemption, it's not necessarily an Australian story.
No, it's not. Yeah.
It's not a Finnish story.
No.
It could be an American story, but people in the story are totally different from you.
Right.
So we are all foreigners in a way.
Yeah.
It's not about whether our skin is similar to those being described in the story. So what is about this native vis-a-vis foreigner, quote unquote, discussion within yourself about it?
The reason that Zhang Guoli decided to have an entirely foreign cast, Western cast, that spoke Chinese is because he actually wanted to avoid a filter in the middle. If you use Chinese actors that were trying to embody Western people with a Western story. And I think he's really achieved something with that.
The idea of the medium being less important, about Shawshank action, us foreigners playing this in Chinese makes the medium less important, right? And breaks down that wall. Like, I think it's a first for China, right? For a foreign cast to do a play
total
in Chinese.
foreign cast, yes.
But it should be, this should be not something of comment, actually, right? If you think about it, right? Because no one's like, oh my goodness, these people not from an English-speaking country are speaking English and doing a play. It's not like you wouldn't comment on it, right?
No.
I guess the point I really want to make is that it shouldn't be of comment that it's foreigners doing Chinese, and that's maybe the real big statement.
But it is the comment.
It is for now.
It is the comment, isn't it?
For now.
That's why a lot of people are coming here and watch you guys. They say, wow, look at all these Lao Wai. They're performing in Chinese in a play that is quite a serious one, Let's see how they are doing.
But that should not be the main point. They should say, how good is the acting?
You don't think that should be the main point?
If we've done our jobs well, it shouldn't.
It shouldn't be.
You have all been in China for years. You for already 4 decades?
42 years.
Wow. My respect. And James?
On and off for around 20 years.
Wow. Shawn?
I'm the baby, 10 years.
Congratulations. During this stage of your life in China, you have encountered such an interesting opportunity to do something different and make a difference also to your audience. But at the same time, what has this journey been like for you?
The whole experience of living in a foreign country, from whatever angle that is for you, right? is an exercise, I think, in learning about common humanity, about just, you know, we're all on this spaceship, you know, floating through the void, and everyone's actually more similar than they're different. People want to be happy, they want to have companionship, they want to find meaning in their lives, you know. They
But
don't
how
want
they
to
express their needs is culturally dependent. It's
culturally, and
it's
that's
different.
and that's very interesting.
And
right?
that's a beautiful. My wife is Brazilian, but she grew up in Beijing.
Yeah.
So Chinese is her first language. We speak Chinese together.
Yeah.
And our children grew up in this Finnish, Chinese, Brazilian environment in Beijing. And there are lots of differences between the cultures. So how we express things, even though they might be the same things that we're thinking about,
Right.
but how we express them is different. But then let's not forget about the individual differences. I think those are also very important. So we should not stereotype. And that's why I think what Zhang Guoli was also thinking, that, you know, he doesn't want to have the stereotypical Chinese actor version of a foreigner.
Yeah. When I first came to China, I came with an organization that actually gave us some training before we came here, and they told us something which I found to be very true, and that was, first of all, you know, your first experiences, or the first year, 2 years, you go through your honeymoon stage of that experience in this foreign culture, foreign place where you see everything through rosy glasses. And then you start going through the actual culture shock of the process. And often there's sort of a 2-year mark, 3-year mark, which defines, is this person actually going to be able to stay and do this or not? But then there's also another thing which is true, which is a reverse culture shock, that when you go back to where you've come from, and it's not the same anymore either. Or it is the same, but they're still seeing things in a particular way that now you see it quite differently, because you've become richer through your experience, through that exposure. And I think that the contrast between the East and West, and China, Australia, US, and Finland as well, I'm sure, is that the contrast is quite significant. If I go to the United States, there'll be some differences to what I'm used to in Australia, but they're not going to be like this. Unless it's some of the food they eat or whatever, which
Food?
Exactly. But I think that you become richer as a person because of that. One thing that really shocked me when I first came to China was how much the average Chinese person that I spoke to on the street knew about Australia. Whereas if I was going to be in Australia and ask the average person on the street about China, they would know very little, if not nothing at all. That really surprised me, and ever since then, really, we've been trying to do some work on the Australia side to try and help them have what we call a bit more Chinese literacy, China literacy, not Chinese language literacy, but China literacy, or capability, understanding more about China. For the country where I come from, #1 trading partner, super important for us economically and for every family in Australia. But we know so little about China and Chinese people. So there's so much work, I think, to do in that aspect.
Matti?
It's interesting because in the early 80s when I came, at that time no one came to China. You couldn't get an individual visa to travel here. That's why I came to study the language, because I wanted to see what China was like, and the only way to get a visa was to come for a summer course of Chinese. And I just fell in love with the language and the country, and I never looked back. But nobody was coming to China those days, from where where I lived, anyways. And then, in the 90s, China started to develop and become more the talk of the town. And everybody was enthusiastic about China. And it was when I said I lived in China for 10 years, then 20 years, and 30 years, everybody was like, wow, that's amazing. China is such an amazing place. And, I was very proud of myself being the bridge, helping people to understand China and running businesses here and so forth. And then, in the past 10 years, it's been a bit different. With some political things happening in the US, also the relationship has become more complicated. And some recent geopolitical events have, at least in the minds of Europeans, changed the image of China quite a bit. So now people ask, well, why would you go to China? I mean, and for me, China hasn't changed. It's still the same good China. All the people I know are still the same good people. I still love the language. I love the food. I love the operas, everything.
the basic fabrics have not changed.
No.
For people's
but
lives.
The environment, the people's lives are much better than they were in the 80s. Everybody I know, the life standard has totally gone through the roof. But so nothing has changed, yet everything has changed because of the macro environment has changed.
Interesting.
But again, it's 40 years is nothing, especially in the history of China. So I'm very confident that things will, get back to a good stage again.
Will you tell me this answer? Is it the result of quite some time's digestion, or is it just an immediate response? You seem to deliver it as a piece of cake.
Well, I think about this all the time. Whenever I interact with people, I get either challenged or some people express their admiration for what I've done in relation to China. So you have to deal with that all the time. Also in China, there's not a day passes that someone, a Chinese person, makes a comment about my Chinese, and then asks me why I'm here, how long I've been here, and all that. So I have to somehow explain myself every single day to everybody.
For me, it also comes back to the arts. I think a lot about the challenges that Matti just mentioned about the last 10 years. Because for me, I think I came to China just as things were turning, right? But I had heard about China and started learning Chinese in the honeymoon phase, right? I first came in 2008 when it was a very different situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Geopolitically. And so I think a lot now about, what the role of the arts can be in trying to at least maintain some exposure for those who don't know. Because like James said, I think the situation is similar in the US, where there is a large gap in understanding, compared to how many students, people, businessmen, etc., who go to the States. And so whatever I can do in terms of the arts to make that more accessible, to just show everybody that we're all humans, that would be great.
And the time to increase the interaction is now.
Yeah, that's
not
right.
to decrease.
When
there's a conflict, you need to even be more in contact with the other to understand what's really going on.
Yeah. But they would say, well, you're in China for too long. You're already being
Contaminated.
Correct.
quote unquote contaminated or whatever. Yeah.
No, that's right. You do get that. Get attacked on Twitter and the newspapers by and it's not because you're saying anything that's overtly wonderful about China. You're just not jumping in with everyone who's saying negative things about the relationship. And I completely agree. With Matti, the last few years, I'd say the last 5-6 years. Less so for us in Australia. In the last 12 to 18 months, we've had a stabilisation of that relationship, which is great. And that's been through a lot of consistent effort by both sides. And I'm delighted at that. But there was a patch there which was quite dark, where, I would be questioned. Questions around allegiances and things like that. Well, hold on, why do we even need to have that question?
What does that have to do with that?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Especially because before it was just the opposite.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh. But hopefully we're in a better place now, and we'll continue to be in a stabilized and better place.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us.